Welcome to everyone. So we'll get started because there's an awful lot to cover. I think I have 170 slides, and we'll cover that as fast as we can go. So dive right in now. And at one point or another, I'm going to talk about kava, and I want you to know that there is a little jug in the back with some cups there. And should you be brave enough, you can go back and sample some kava. Okay. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's dive in here. You want the slide to work? Want to work. Start from the beginning again. Okay, now it should work. So I've owned Independence for 23 years, and I've cruised basically from Chesapeake to Maine before setting off on this crazy voyage. She's semi-custom, number 11 out of 15, and her original owner sailed her home from Taiwan. She's pretty tender, and I often will sail with one reef in the main. I've rebuilt practically every system on the boat over the years, and I'm slowly now rebuilding some of the rebuild systems, as they wear out or superseded for new equipment. She's pretty comfortable with an enclosed pilot house, wind vane steering, autopilot, M&E, solar and wind power, a great stereo, and all the creature comforts of home. My pride and joy is my nav station. After years in the marine industry helping others fulfill their dreams, it was finally my turn to fulfill my dream. So there we are. So the goal here was a westabout circumnavigation. So the trade winds blow this direction. So we left up here, came down, went through Turks and Caicos, through the canal, down to Ecuador, back up, and I'm going to break it all down a little bit. We like to buddy boat with others, and we want to circumnavigate and immerse ourselves in the culture and heartbeat of the places we want to visit. Many times we'll do land travels and truly explore what makes each location, each country tick, and make lifelong friends and help wherever we can with donations of donated reading glasses, t-shirts and hats, children's books, school and art supplies. I'm not in a hurry other than getting older, and I'm in awe of the places I have seen and the wonderful people that I've met. So this was leaving Norwalk Cove Marina on a cold and wet Christmas morning where Gary was the only one brave enough to slide down the ramp in the snow and see us off. And it was really cold. So there we go. So here was the first jump, was coming down the coast of the U.S., stopped in North Carolina, then in St. Augustine, then sailed around the Bahamas to Turks and Caicos, down through the Windward Passage, through the Caribbean Sea, down to Panama, then to the San Blas Islands off of Panama, and that was wonderful. Then through the canal, we did the back of the Darien Gap and everything up there in these islands here. Then sailed the boat down to down with Panama down here, and then down to Ecuador, and did 2 months of traveling in Ecuador and Peru. And they wanted to extort money out of me, so I stole the boat from Ecuador, brought it back up to Panama. And because COVID was still raging, the boat was stuck in Ecuador for a year on a mooring. So when I got back to it, there was mold this thick on all the wood. So it took me 2 weeks to get the boat ready to go. And then I came back up to Panama. Then, because COVID was still raging, we brought the boat up to Mexico, to Chiapas, which is the bottommost city in Mexico, and then did land tours going up to see the beautiful ruins and other stuff there. So that was nice. Now, consider this. Pictures of the Earth you're used to seeing have all the continents, and it looks very green. When viewed from the other side, it looks much more like a blue ocean planet than it does a green one. And this was the planet I wanted to discover. So now we went from Mexico down to Galapagos, and then through the South Pacific, stopping at Marquesas, the Tuamotus, the Society Islands, the Cook Islands, Niue, like dozens and dozens of little places. And then ended up in Fiji, and then went from Fiji to Australia. And that's where this talk is going to be, talking about cruising Fiji and going to Australia. So Fiji consists of over 300 islands, with the largest two featuring the largest cities and public infrastructures. Cruisers checking into Fiji must do so by checking in here or down here in Suva. And you have to sail through all the islands that you want to see to check in. And then you've got to sail back upwind to get to those islands. The more remote islands are very remote, often with no running water, electricity, shy of a generator now and then, or maybe some solar power. The islanders are very tribal, with associations going back hundreds, if not thousands of years, and live in smaller villages. There are two distinct island groups, the Yasawa group, which is up off this way, and it's very close to the main thing. So these tend to be touristy islands with a lot of resorts on them until you get up to the end. And then the Lau Group, which is out over here. This is the Lau Group. So the Lau Group is all upwind, and there's hardly any touristy things there. So very few people actually make the effort to get there. And that's what makes it so special. So we arrived late in the afternoon on another Christmas Eve, and we were told to pick up an outside quarantine mooring and not allowed to enter. We struggled to get customs and immigrations to come to get us, and it took some waterworks by my crew Candy, and finally they arrived. We were greeted at the quarantine dock by the marina staff, who gathered to sing us a Fijian welcome song, as they do to every boat that comes in. It was an amazing welcome, unlike anything we've ever had before, and you instantly felt at home. We tied up and we were welcomed to the beautiful marina restaurant for Christmas dinner. It was the perfect ending to a 9,000-mile voyage. The Fijian people are among the kindest and happiest people we've ever met so far. So the basin is pretty typhoon safe. Boats put out their fenders and they tie in together, and they run chains out to sunken chain and things here. So all of these chains go down and shackle to this chain. Then they tie off to the docks. They put fenders down, but you're told not to just hang your fender. You've got to put a line from the bottom of your fender under the boat to the other side, because when it's blowing 120 in a typhoon, your fenders will blow up and you'll bang against other boats. So you've got to tie the fenders down. So I thought that was kind of interesting. We don't quite do that here. So we'll talk about the land storage later. The boat shed restaurant was the gathering place for all the cruisers and from around the world. Fiji allows boats to stay for 5 years, duty free. So many cruisers come from Australia and New Zealand, much the way we go to Bimini or Caribbean or something, and we'll use that kind of as a close place to go to an exotic. So they go, and many boats never leave Fiji. They sail from New Zealand to Fiji. They're there for 5 years. And after 5 years, the boats are in no condition to head back to New Zealand. So you can get good deals in Fiji. Getting on and off the boat was definitely a challenge. There's this wooden platform there, and it extends away from the bulkhead. And it was easy at high tide, but really difficult at low tide. So it was about a 3.5-foot tide. So you can see the little ladder and the steps and everything there. So we were forced to climb on and off the bow. We couldn't come in stern to, because it got davits on the back and solar panels and a wind vane and all this stuff. There's just too much hardware there. So we came in. And because this marina was so safe and we were tucked in really good position, it allowed us to leave the boat and tour the island by land by renting a car. So we rented a car, and we basically had decided we were going to circumnavigate Fiji, or this island, and then stop, and where we needed to or wanted to, we'd go in to visit, the national parks, the waterfalls and things. So Fijian culture has been significantly shaped by the influence of the Indian immigrants who came from India, which now form a huge part of the population. Most of them are descendants of indentured laborers brought to Fiji by the British in the late 19th and 20th century to work on the sugarcane plantations. This influence is very evident in the language, religion, cuisine, traditions, and festivals that they have. The Indian Fijians are very entrepreneurial, and they own most of the stores, hotels, and businesses. It's not that the native Fijians are lazy, they just have a more nuclear focus and family values, and they value family time above the business opportunities. So of the Fijian islands, this is the largest one and home to more than 3/4 of the population. So it's got the main capital, Suva, down the bottom, but it also, in Nadi here, is where there's an international airport. So that's where everything comes and goes here. So we rented a car and set off for a 4-day tour of the island. The first stop was a cultural reenactment center based on ancient tribal lands. They did a great job of explaining and demonstrating the Fijian tribal life when they were cannibals. And they were one of the first islands in the whole South Pacific to openly admit their cannibalistic history. So this is pictures of the original cannibals here, pictures of a modern day wannabe cannibal, and then pictures of them doing basket weaving. And they had stations set up in these little huts of basket weaving and carving weapons and cooking food and making clothing. So it was really quite interesting. They did a great presentation. Here were some war clubs. Now, they were cannibals, right? So I will just tell you what this little tool in the middle is, what they call it. Okay, and you can your brain will do the rest. They call that a brain pick. Okay. All right. So as you progress through the South Pacific, from the Marquesas towards Fiji, the influence of the missionaries has really moderated the tribal dancing. In Fiji, the female dancers were covered with much more clothing, and the dancing was far less risque. There was none of the wiggling hips and the coconuts and brassiere and all that. I mean, here it was much more laid back. So you can see it's much more storytelling and passed along, but it's not the crazy hula things. And then the guys would dance, and the guys would also tell stories, and they were far less intimidating and more storytelling. They weren't warlike. So you get a feel of what it's like. It was really interesting. And no Fijian dance exhibition would be complete without a fire dance. So kava is a ceremony, or they use kava in a ceremony that's a ritual in every village and a feature on many Fijian things to do lists. It's commonplace for Fijian families and friends to gather together on a daily basis and enjoy kava together. They call it Fiji time. Kava is known as yogona, is quite simply, or quite simply grog, is the traditional national drink of Fiji. It's mildly narcotic and sedative drink made from the crushed root of the Yogona plant strained with water. It's served in a large communal bowl. It's part of the traditional kava ceremony. When drunk, it creates a pleasant, numb feeling around your mouth and tongue and lips, as well as a sense of calm and relaxation. But I can tell you, you can try some. You're not going to feel that. I'd like you to taste it to see what it tastes like and imagine drinking 4 or 5 big bowls of that. There are grog shops all around the towns and cities, and ceremonies on the right from today, okay, and then ceremony on the left from 1916. Originally, the women would chew the root and spit it into the communal dish, and that's what they would drink. Today, they use a fine mesh bag and put it in and squeeze it like a tea bag and strain it. So I brought back a little packages of kava, and I've had a couple of kava ceremonies for people where we would mix the kava and do the whole thing, and then you'd sample it. But you can only sample it by doing it the correct way. So the true experience lies in the complete kava ceremony. It's usually part of a ceremony atmosphere or when welcoming guests into a village or important occasions. They offer it to you in a cup. So they dip the cup in, or sometimes they have a ladle and will fill the little cup. Usually it's like half a coconut. And it's either full, which they call high tide, or half full, called low tide. You clap once and say bula. Then you drink the whole thing down one shot. Then you clap 3 times and you say matha, which means, thank you or bless you. And that's it. Then they pass it to the next person and they go through the whole bula thing. When you walk down the street in the middle of town, people walk up to, walking by you, will look you in the eye and say bula. So it's the friendliest place I've ever been. It was absolutely unbelievable. And here's a kava bar just driving along the road. Now, the Indian influence was quite substantial in Nandi. There was actually this huge Hindu temple. So Christianity is 69% of it, mostly Methodist based, and Hinduism is 24%. And the split between the Indo-Fijians are 37%, with indigenous Fijians for 51%. So here's the inside of that temple. And they make you take off your shoes and you have to put on like a skirt, and go in. So you have to dress appropriately and take your hat off when you go inside. But it's beautiful paintings and beautiful stuff. So it was really quite nice. And then they have indoor and outdoor marketplaces. There were hundreds of vendors selling basically the same stuff, a huge selection, and then you've got to negotiate with them. And though most Fijians speak English, when you get to the marketplace, they can only speak Fijian. So you're living with Google Translate trying to say, how much for 3? And then they want to sell you 27 because you're used to feeding a family. And it's like, no, we only need 3. So, here's another one of the marketplaces. I mean, they were huge. So we were traveling and we went to a national park that was up in the middle of the island. And there were 4 pools with waterfalls between them that went down the side of this mountain. There were a lot of kids up there playing, and it was just a really nice setting, very quiet, very peaceful, a little hot and steamy, but it was really nice. And the kids are all swimming in the water, and it was just great. So we went and looked for another waterfall, but you had to hike up to it. So we hiked up to it and we got to the waterfall, and all the kids are jumping in the water and playing. And this family came in and settled down next to us. All the kids ran off to play. And the father looks at me and says, "You want some kava?" And I'm sure. So he pulls out a 2-liter Coke bottle filled with kava, pulls out the bowl. So I look at him and clap my hands and said, "Bula." And he goes, "Oh my God, you know our customs." So, we had 4 or 5 bowls. It was great. I wasn't driving. Yeah. And yeah, right. And it was really, really fun. I mean, nice people. And then we were staying at an Airbnb and we got to know the people that owned it. And they said, "Oh, let's go to another waterfall." So we were hiking up this hill to get to the waterfall. And this Jeep drives up and says, "No, you're not going to make it if you're walking. You climb in." So he has everyone climb in the back of his truck here. And they were banana farmers trying to set up a banana farm. And we just all climbed in and rode the truck up to the top. Quite fun. And then on the far side of Fiji, we stopped at basically it was a resort, but there was no one there. It was completely empty. So here's the resort at the very end of the island that was virtually empty. We had it to ourselves. So the best part of Fiji is that their dollar is 50 cents American. So everything is half price. And it goes a long way with food and all, and even with the Airbnbs. So this is a nice place. So when we got back, we had some things to do. And since we had the rental car, I decided to put it to good use. So one of the things we had to do is measure the mainsail to get a new one made. So I took it off the boat. And of course, when you have a rental car, you put it on top of the rental car to take it out to the grassy lawn in the back so that you can spread it out. My original mainsail was 3 years old when I bought the boat in 2002, and it made it almost halfway around the world. The new main I got from Max Sails in Florida, who make really, really good cruising sails. And but there's one good thought about how to make your sails last longer. Reef early and reef often. So I want to see if you get this. I was very, very proud of my new mainsail and see if you appreciate my sail number. I thought that was particularly clever. I was feeling good about that. All right. So here's hauling the boat. They haul you out on a big travel lift and very modern, and they bring you out and they cut this huge pit into the coral and rock that's like 4 or 5 feet deep. And they put wooden blocks down into the bottom of it. They lower the boat down and put all these tires underneath it. And then once you're down, they strap it down with these huge webbing straps and crank it down so that the boat can't go anywhere. So if it blows 120 miles an hour, the boat's not going to fall over the way it would on poppets. So there were dozens, if not 100 boats, all buried in the ground this way. And I actually got to have, I was doing work on the boat and things. So I was living on the boat. So the bathrooms were way over there. And this is nice and dry and it looks beautiful. But when the rainy season started to come, all of a sudden there was 4 inches of mud that I had to slog through to get to and from the boat. And if you look at the back of the ladder here, you see there's a bucket inside the tire. So that's so I could rinse my feet off and get the mud off my feet before I climbed up the ladder to get in the boat. So once I was inside, I had a little air conditioner that would vent outside going. And then I set up the sewing machine and I started making sun awnings and I made snap-on bug covers for all the hatches that would snap up. They were very much needed. And I installed Starlink, which was an absolute game changer in terms of communications. So another project was I had to get the anchor chain galvanized. So I had to lower it down. And since I had that really nice, tiny little Toyota rental car, I loaded all the chain into the rental car and drove 90 miles on all these like dirt roads to get to the galvanized place. And it came back and it looked pretty good. It held up quite well. And while we were there, Candy had volunteered at the local school, and she reorganized their library. They had no method of organizing the library, so she and a bunch of other people color coded all the fiction books one color, the nonfiction another color, the research, so at least the kids could get them back into the right colored shelves, and that was actually quite fun. And meanwhile, I was putting new alternators in the boat, and I went from an 85 amp alternator to a 215 amp alternator and put a new water pump on the boat. And I also had some wood projects where the boat had gotten hit and was damaged. So I had to scarf in a new piece of big teak and put it on the rail, and it actually came out pretty good. Then it was time to leave. So we had to start provisioning. So we went to the store, and here we had to buy 10 $20 bundles of kava to give to the chiefs of the village that we were going to go visit. And I never thought provisioning would include buying a supply of socially required narcotics. So soon enough, it was time to say goodbye to our friends and the staff at Vuda. And it felt like our home away from home. It's very emotional when the boat is blessed and they put a little wreath on the bow of local flowers and the staff starts singing, knowing that you're moving on and you may never be back to this marina and see them again. And when they get going, they actually get into three-part harmony. You're standing on the deck, with your camera, and you've got tears running down your eyes because they're saying goodbye. You don't see that in any U.S. marinas. Why is that? So we had to go navigate up to the Yasawa group. So it's navigating around the Fijian Islands is not for the faint of heart. There were reefs everywhere. You could never be off watch or let your guard down because you were constantly jogging through. So we were leaving over here and going up through here. We stopped over here, and then we worked our way up through, and then worked our way up through this whole island chain, ending up at this island in this little harbor way up over here. And down at the lower part here, there were lots of resorts, but by the time you got up here, ferry never comes there. They have no cell phone service. People are very, very living a rural tribal life there. So navigating, I use a program called OpenCPN with satellite views. And here you can see, this is the island that we're looking at right here. This is on Navionics, and this is the satellite view of all the reefs around that island. So that gives you an idea of what you're really looking at. So Navionics in Fiji was quite good, but now the boats in Indonesia, I'm finding that it's sometimes like a quarter mile off. So the satellite views are the ones. And here is an example, unfortunately, of navigating in this island are very, very serious. Here's the keel of a boat that made a fatal mistake and didn't live to tell about it. So going to the resorts are really good because they're very accommodating to cruisers who anchor off and dinghy in. And oftentimes you can just come in with the dinghy and they will offer to use their facility for the day if you make a dinner reservation. You just dress appropriately and you mingle with the folks who are paying big dollars to visit. And it was really sweet. And here's our third ensign of the trip was finally gave up the ghost. And walking from one resort to another, you have to walk past the airport. And the airport was this gravel airport with a sign saying, beware of low-flying aircraft. So you look both ways and then run. And this is what one of the resorts looked like. They were really quite sweet. And we hiked up to the top of, this is Musket Cove. We hiked up to the top of the island and looked down. And this is a very cruiser-oriented place that every winter runs a huge regatta, and they have 150 boats show up. And then you get to the more remote islands, and this is just Main Street in one of the remote islands. So when we come to an island like this, we have to do what they call sebu sebu, which is bringing in the kava, presenting it to the chief of the tribe. And he sits down, he talks about it and blesses it, and then he welcomes you to the island. And you know, this little village had no cell phone service, no solar panels, no nothing. It was really, you know, many times they would come to us on their boat, their little row out tugboats, and ask for us to charge their cell phones. So the Fijians use woven mats for everything, flooring, wall covering, sleeping mats. And this lady's hut was very close to the beach, and she had the afternoon sun all afternoon. So we had dozens of cheater glasses and only a handful of sunglasses, but we dug out some sunglasses and gave her a pair. And she said it actually changed her life because she could see while she was working. So these are what they use for drums. They make a beautiful hollow tone when they bang on them. And these are yam fields that they were very happy to show us. Some yams for the minister of the town, some yams for the older people in the town, and the rest are for the family. The dinghy always would bring all the kids out who wanted to see it and visit us. And then this is the inside of one of their houses. And they have sleeping mats and eating mats, and they just pull out the different mat for what they're going to do and put it right on the floor. So everyone greets you with bula, and they thank you with vinaka. And that's almost all the Fijian you need to know. So we saw the sign that says, welcome to Lau's Tea House. So you have to climb up and over the hill and you come down on the beach. And she would serve you sandwiches and some tea, but you'd sit down on these little benches and things on the side overlooking the reef, and it was absolutely stunning. So this is traditional cooking in a pit with food on hot rocks wrapped in leaves and covered with palm fronds. And then here the chief is preparing kava. So there were two islands that were together, and there was a spit between them where the current would run through. So it was known as Manta Alley. So when the tide changes, you go there with your dinghy and your snorkel gear, and you go upstream into the current, and you jump off and tie the dinghy to your waist and float down. Meanwhile, the mantas are swimming upstream with their mouths open, sucking in all the stuff that's being blown through with the current. So we stayed for 4 hours and made that run like 6 times, swimming with these 6-7 foot manta rays. Unbelievable. So this is where coconuts come from, coconut palm trees. They start as a coconut and they actually grow out. And the roots are growing down and the top's growing up and the root pops away and there it is. So we were stuck in this beautiful bay at the far end of Yasawa for a week while the trade winds were blowing in and we couldn't get in. Then we helped the local chief rebuild the carburetor and get his outboard running again. And we're finally able to escape and we had to motor in the dying breezes to get to the other big island, which is Vinulivu. So here's the path we took. We had to go up here. These were the islands we just visited. Here's where we were stuck. Then we had to make the thing around the reef, cut through, and there were cuts through the reef that you had to follow carefully to get through. And then you could come up to this town, which was a much smaller town than anything on this big island. And that island was called Savu Savu. So here we were on the dock at the restaurant marina there, and it was quite nice. But right across the way, they'd hollowed out the middle of an island and built this huge resort with the mega yacht docks. So this is where ultimately will become the mega yacht haven for Fiji, and they're just getting started. And this yacht here belonged to Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google. The Pacific Posse would put on a free rum party, and over 150 cruisers came with 60 boats, all anchored out around and coming in by dinghy. So, and we ran into people we met in Panama and in Mexico, and it's just everyone working their way across the Pacific. So, here's we off to find some waterfalls, and these waterfalls were beautiful, but it had been raining, and the way in was through the mud and through the rocks, and you had to climb down this precarious hillside to get to the waterfalls. But once you got to the waterfalls, they were outrageous, just amazing, but way up, like an hour into the middle of the island. So we had the guide take us there. And then we went to the local church just to check it out. And we met these really nice people, and they invited us back to their house. So we had lunch with them, and we had octopus and fish and all sorts of local fruit and vegetables. I mean, it's just wonderful. And it turned out that their daughter worked at the marina in the accounting department. And we had this big 90-foot yacht come in front of us that had like all the toys, big powerboat, monster boat, beautiful boat. And this picture I took, the mega yacht's right here, and I look out, and here's a Fijian family on a reed raft that's lashed together, paddling by, and I'm looking at, first world, state of the art, multi-million-dollar yacht, and a reed raft right here, right next to it, and it really kind of does this whole culture shock thing in your head. Now, the Indians would have their Indian festivals for the Hindu festivals. So this was the Ganesh festival. And a young lady or a lady ran up to me, and they put chalk on their faces in different colors. So, she came up with her chalk, and I'm taking the picture, and she's like smooching this stuff all over my face. So Ganesh is a prominent Hindu deity, is recognized with the elephant head, and is revered as the remover of obstacles, the god of beginnings, and the patron of intellectuals and writers. And after this, we provisioned and prepared for our exploration of the Lau Group. So here again, we were stuck with the trade winds blowing in towards us. We had to wait for a window. Then the window came. So we got out of there, motored up against the wind for a while. But then the wind died, and we had to motor 190 miles to get up to this little island far end. And our goal was when the trades would come back in, then it would be easy to hop back down the islands going downwind. So that worked really well. So you had to work hard to reach these islands, and that's why the people there would really welcome you, because they know that you worked to get there, and not that many people visit them. So this is one of the little weird islands that they have there. There are a lot of them look like little mushrooms. So this is a local store in one of the villages. So this guy is the shopkeep, and this is the stuff he's selling. But I think he made most of his money because he had a box full of kava powder, and he would dole it into little paper bags and roll it up and put the price on it. And they'd sell for $2 or $5, and all the villagers would carve wooden things, make some money, come and buy the kava. So we hired a guy to give us tours of the island, and he was taking us up into the rocks and all over the place, and he was really quite good. So we paid him afterwards, and I'll get to more of that story in a minute. But here's climbing up through, and here's some of the vista that we could see looking down on the islands. And there were only one other boat from Australia and us, and we got to know them quite well. And then one of the places he took us was these caves that held the bones of people the cannibals had eaten. And they threw them all up the hill into this cave, and they were still there from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So that's pretty interesting. And we never see that on any of the islands in the South Pacific. Most of them were, cannibals. No, we were never cannibals. They'd look the other way. These guys are like, yeah, sure we were. So here we were looking out on it, and here's the guide is in the back corner. So we went to their house, and they served us lunch and had all the food out. The women had been catching octopus and fish all the day before, and we had seen them in the water and waved to them, and they were quite busy. So they put on this huge feast, and we asked them later. We said, "Well, we hope that the money we paid your husband for the tour will help." And she said, "What money?" He had spent it all on kava and didn't tell her. So all of a sudden there was this big fight. We said, thank you very much, and walked out. So so here was a wood carver, and he makes his living carving wooden bowls and fish and work clubs and things like that. And he was making this beautiful turtle bowl. And he started with a big slab of wood and like hand cut the thing out and then started carving it all out. So there was a little mini cruise ship coming in, and what they do is they carry all their goods down to the beach and set up a little storefront, with mats, and then they bargain with the people, and the people come off the cruise boat, buy some things, look around, say, wow, this is nice, and go back on the cruise boat. They never go to the village. Here's the guy in front of his house carving this thing for 4 days. And I bet him he wasn't going to get done before the cruise ship. He's like, no, 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 he definitely will. So I would come back every day and bust his chops. And he really did it. It was beautiful. He sold it for 200 Fijian or 100 US dollars for 4 days of work. And I paid him up in cold beers. So another craftsman here is sanding a bowl. So they had solar panels on their communal house running down to batteries to an inverter and ran 220 motor with a sanding disc on the end. And they would all share that to carve and smooth their bowls out. It was really, really amazing. So you could have your own private beach in the middle of nowhere, and we would also meet our friends for cruising, and we would have sundowners and watch the sunset. And you wanted to get back to your boat before the bugs came out. So this was an island we visited. It had a coral shelf that had a half-mile long waterfall when the tide went down. It was really amazing. This little waterfall just went on forever. But it was very relaxing. The sound there was really nice. And some of the islands were just intricate shapes and things, really beautiful. And then we knew a storm was coming in, and I wanted to go ditch behind something and hide. So I found this little nook to ditch in behind a little island. So here you can see the satellite view of where we went in and anchored. And then over here is the navionics view of the same thing, where to go in and go in through. But right here, they don't show you, was a reef you had to cut through, and there's only about 15 feet wide to get through to get into this little hole. So that was fun. But we stayed there for like 2 or 3 days because it blew hard. So this was a lady who was weaving mats by hand, just as her ancestors did. So here again, the kids would come up to you because you were just basically kid magnets. And we were sailing along in the trade winds. We'd just have the jib out. We'd just lazily going down. The wind vane would be steering. This is as good as it gets, sailing in the Fijian Islands with just the jib. The wind vane's doing the steering. Got the stereo on. It's really comfortable. Andy was in the back doing a crossword puzzle. You can see the dinghy, the solar panels, and we have two outboards because your dinghy is your SUV, and it's absolutely critical to the success of your voyage. So, you need to have a backup so that you can fix one. And I've got rebuild it kits for both of them. So we would go to some islands, and people would show us their prize pigs and be very, very proud of their pigs. And then we go to another island where you're cave diving and going up underneath and seeing where the bats are. So here's the end of the Lau Group was the fabulous Bay of Islands. So this was the primo cruising ground in the area, and probably one of the nicest cruising areas in the whole planet. So we had all this bay to ourselves, and then all of a sudden this boat came in. It was like 120 foot something. I mean, amazing. But so visiting cruisers were magnets for the kids, and we presented kava to the chief, and we were welcome to the village. The kids would take us on tours and take us around and introduce us to everyone. So we donated our cheater glasses to the older folks, and we had a lot of hats and t-shirts for the kids. Then we went back after the last island. We went back to the marina, and it was just in time for Thanksgiving. So we put together a traditional American Thanksgiving. Now, the Kiwis and the Aussies think that a turkey is a scrunchy little bird that runs through the woods. And so they were not so interested in trying turkey. And we urged them, really, you want to try this. So they tried it, and most of them came back for seconds or thirds. They had never had big, fat American turkeys. But that fat American turkey was like $200 and air freighted in, but it was worth it. So then on the way motoring up to the Lau Group, my autopilot died, and it was like irreparable. There was just nothing I could do with it. So I bought a completely new B&G system and had it air freighted in, and had to build on the RAM and the arms and doubled the size of my network and spent a lot of time doing that. And my best friend became Eric from Fiji Freight. It was a forwarding company in LA. So I'd ship everything from around the United States to Eric. Eric would put them in boxes and then put it into a aluminum cargo container, shove it on a plane that's going to Fiji. It would land in Nadi, which is 20 miles away, and a delivery truck would bring it to the marina and hand it to me. It was very expensive, but it was an amazing service. So the definition of cruising is boat repair in exotic places. So here we're having our Thanksgiving fireplace going, thanks to YouTube, and we started provisioning for our voyage to Australia. It was time for one more kava ceremony, and it was time to leave for Australia. We were pushing the season, and a typhoon was already brewing at the top of Australia. So they always have lots of singing and start passing the kava around to different people. He's got to clap and say "bula" and then sip it down. So they would serve one to every visiting person, and they would drink two themselves. So now we had to set off on the 1,700-mile trip from Fiji to Newcastle, Australia, where we would check in and then rush down the coast to get to Sydney by Christmas. We had to take a big jog after Lord Howe Island because it turned out that the currents off of Australia are wicked. And this big current was right there that was going to hit us on the nose. So we had to go around it before we could cut in. So that was kind of interesting. So we entered commercial Newcastle Harbor, and remember the saying is you can't sell coal to Newcastle? Well, Newcastle is the biggest coal export center in Australia. And we were told to take a quarantine buoy and put our yellow Q flag up. They called us in the morning and said, okay, come on into the dock. And they checked us in. We had pre-submitted papers and things in and visas. But they confiscated some of the Australian meat that we had frozen in the freezer because we bought it in Fiji. Okay, explain that. Go figure. So we had the boat decorated for Christmas, and we met a bunch of cruisers there. We would have loved to stay some more, but it was time to press on towards Sydney. So we hopped down to Sydney and entered Sydney Harbor. And Sydney Harbor is a zoo. So you can see the AIS signals here. These are all mostly ferries, all zooming about from one harbor to the other, because the main ferry terminal is down over in here, and they all pick up people at the ferry docks and bring them in. So it's a 12-minute run from the outskirts of Sydney to the ferry docks. And we were lucky to get a dock at the yacht club and had a mooring in here. We were able to bring the boat in and put it on a dock at the yacht club. And Candy's brother lived 4 blocks up the street. So we walked to Christmas dinner. So that was pretty crazy. And then I took this from a plane when I was flying back over Fiji at one point. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And you can see all the boats. And all the shallow water is taken by moorings. And if you come in and need to anchor, you're in 50 feet. So there are transient moorings, but it's first come, first serve, 48 hours if you can get one. So we were about 2 miles from the Sydney Central Business District, and the high ferries were all zooming by and everything. And, it was quite busy. But we had to position ourselves for the fireworks for New Year's. So here is a big, there's one ferry, one ship terminal between the Opera House and the bridge, and it dwarfs the city when they come in. So here was our view looking out, in the, from where we were anchored. And then we were there the day and a half before New Year's because I wanted to get a good spot and lock it in. And this was the view that we had after a light rainstorm had come through. So, and then just a little bit later, it got more dramatic. Finally, I got my picture postcards, for the trip. So since we were at the zoo and it was a day before New Year's, we took the dinghy and went to the beach and then hiked up the hill and went to the zoo. So that's where I got to see my first live koala because we didn't see any in the wild there. And here's the boat anchored out in the middle right here. So it was quite nice. And here I was first introduced to bin chickens. A bin chicken is the Australian white ibis, the native wading bird known for its habit of scavenging for food in urban areas on the tops of tables and on the bottom of things, and including garbage bins. So the Australians have named them bin chickens. So for New Year's, we had most of Candy's family on board. So we had her two brothers, her sister, and they had the third brother on the video call for the New Year's fireworks. And the New Year's fireworks are very much like New York City. Multiple barges all going off at the same time. Really amazing. I mean, really, really amazing. But what makes Sydney fireworks really special is the bridge. When they start shooting stuff off the bridge, and you can see the bottom, they call this the waterfall, where it all falls off the bridge and comes down. And it was magical. This was goosebumps. So that was very, very cool. And here again, now New Year's is over. We said goodbye to everybody. We had half the people from the yacht club knew we were out there. And the launch driver said, "Oh, can we come out and tie up to you?" So he brought a whole bunch of people out from the yacht club and they tied up next to us in the harbor. They climbed on board and they bought drinks and stuff. And we just had this big party raging on the boat. So much fun. We met a lot of nice people. So then we wanted to explore Sydney Harbor. So these are all the nooks and crannies we went. And at one point we went up here and you go underneath the harbor bridge here and up over to the side. And there was like a little marina there with 3 moorings. And I said, if there are 3 moorings there, we could certainly anchor there. So we went in and anchored, and this was our view of the city from where we were anchored. I said, wow, let's get out the dinghy and go over to the city. So this is where the ferries all are running back and forth, and the cruise ships are going by. So we hopped in the dinghy and we ran across to the city. So here we were, and I can tell you, I've never pulled up to a submarine in the dinghy before. We tied him to a dock at the marina across the way, and we had a wonderful lunch. And we checked in with the dock girl, and we said, "Oh, we'd like to, tie up for a while and maybe give us a slip." And she said, "Well, where's your boat?" And we pointed down and said, "Right there." And she looked at us like, "What?" She said, $12. I had no idea. So that was fun, and it was just really wonderful. But in Sydney Harbor, it is so big and so many nooks and crannies. One harbor has got seaplanes landing day and night, and the next one has cruise ships turning around and spinning in and out. And you've got to be aware that in this kind of limited time, I can only show you a fraction of the pictures of the places and things we've seen. Here's the inside of that yacht club where we stayed, the Royal Sydney Amateur Sailing Club, which was wonderful. And here was the Royal Sydney Flying Squadron, which is not flying. These are the Australian 18s where they've got 12 crew on them. They're all out on trapezes flying across with monster spinnakers. And then these people were doing the bridge climb, where you put on a jumpsuit and a harness, and they clip you onto a wire, and you climb up to the top of the bridge that was shooting off the fireworks. I've actually done that. It's really amazing. But they don't let you take pictures because they're afraid you're going to drop your phone. So they'll take pictures of you for you, and then put them on a chip and give them to you. So here we were in the harbor, and this is the radar view of one of the harbors with all the boats in the harbors and all the stuff going on. And you can kind of get an idea how busy it is. So we left Sydney Harbor and we're bouncing our way up the coast, and we went back to Newcastle just in time when the Clipper Around the World race had come in, partied for a couple of days, replenished the boats, changed out some of the crew, and then did a harbor start and started the race on their next leg, which is going to be like a 3,000-mile leg. So that was pretty interesting. And then we got some really bad weather, so we had to go ditch in. So we ditched into a little place called Coffs Harbor. And it was a tiny bit of protection along the coast. And luckily, we just had to come in, go the jog around the end, and we were right there at the very end of the marina. Because I don't have a bow thruster, so if I can just come in, pull in, I'm happy camper. So we passed along towns on the coast like Coolangatta and Coba and Coragongo Point and Nambucca and Woolagula and Yamba. They're all indigenous names that they've kept. So we entered through the seaport entrance here, coming into the Southport Seaport. And this area is like a blended of Miami, the Jersey Shore, and the U.S. Intercoastal Waterway all in one spot. It's really populated in some spots and very affluent. And this is where would be our safe haven for typhoon season and allow us our tour inland, spend time with Candy's sisters, and return home. So we went to the Southport Yacht Club. The Southport Yacht Club is like the snooty club in Southport. And it was a beautiful club. They had huge boats and things there. The dazzling array of very large power sailing boats. We stayed 2 days. Um, and while we were there, Steve Jobs' wife arrived in Venus that he had designed but was never on board. And this was the largest mega yacht to ever visit Australia. Happened to come in when we were there. Now, we came in and I saw this really weird vessel that kind of looked like a bug or a beetle or something like that, except for it's 131 feet long. This is called the yacht, Y-O-T. It's 75-foot beam and has the capacity for 399 people. It's been designed as the ultimate floating event space, featuring 2 decks, each with a full-service cocktail bar, commercial kitchen, DJ booth, top-of-the-line AV system, and they cater for your every indulgence. They have 3 other boats somewhat similar to this. And we found that young Australians like to party in style. I realized this was recorded on my phone from 200 yards away. This is 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. So we were lucky to get into this marina. It was associated with a high-rise condo development where Candy's aunt lived. So she lived in one of the buildings back over here, this building, which was still 30-something stories tall. And she arranged her birth for us. So we traveled a little bit, and then I started seasons maintenance, and I got some projects done. But here's a picture of the entrance in the marina and the condos that they had on the wall in the condo thing. That was really nice. Candy got to see her families, and she got to be the favorite auntie for a gaggle of nieces and nephews. And then I started working on the boat. So I pulled the boat up to a huge marina. They've got marinas there that have bays for mega yachts. I mean, their marinas make ours look really sad. The biggest marina around between Bridgeport and is Newport Shipyard around here. And Newport Shipyard is like a little corner of this marina. I sanded and painted the bottom, got 2 more coats of bottom paint on, started working on the deck. One of my goals this year was the non-skid was 20 years old and gotten worn and dangerous. So I took like 2 or 3 weeks of sanding and prepping the work to get it on. And it came out really well. Taping it all out was the hardest project. And I used a thing called Kiwi Grip, where, when they have popcorn ceilings, they use that special roller that's really rough. Well, you use that on the Kiwi Grip, and it makes it really good non-skid. And it's supposed to last for 7 years. And I saw some boats that it was like 9 and 10 years. It still looked great. And you can touch it up very easily. So I'm very pleased. And the boat came out really well. It's not bad for 44 years old. Then it was time to come home really quickly. So we came home for 3 months, and I got introduced to my 3-week-old grandson. So, and you can tell by the picture on the right that my heart was smitten. Okay, that was it. Then it was time to go back, and we had to travel the whole length of Australia to continue pressing on. So we had a 1,900-mile summer cruise up the east coast of Australia. The goal was to hop our way, anchoring out, and occasionally indulging in the many wonderful marinas on the way. But on the way, how many people have seen Delfosse on YouTube? These people sailing around the world, no one really. They've been doing it for like 10 years, and they talk about where they've been, what they're doing. They're building a new boat. So we got to stop by and see the new boat. So we saw them building the boat, which was actually quite nice, and got to meet them. That was fun. We happened upon a 2-day air show. That was fun. This is when you know you're far from home. Wall Street, 9,800 kilometers. Nova Scotia, 16,000 kilometers. San Francisco, 11,000 kilometers. Bora Bora, where we had been last year, 5,700 kilometers. So navigating this Australia intercoastal waterway was one of the most difficult parts of the entire trip. Timing low and high tides at certain spots required you sneaking out of one anchorage on a falling tide to try and hit a certain spot at high tide where you don't get through. We timed it perfectly, and even when we got through, we only had 1 foot of water under the keel. So that was pretty hairy. And once we hit the sand, got stuck on the sand, and a fisherman came over and took our anchor and put it out 100 feet. And we were able to wait for the tide to come in and catch ourselves off. So we did some sightseeing. We met some new friends. We happened to a marina, and they had a yearly wine and spirits festival. So we made some new friends and did some rum tasting. We met some new cruisers who were heading north, and we decided to buddy boat with them and hopped our way up. And they were explaining to us these strange Australian markers that are in the water, learning their strange backwards buoy system, which is green right returning. So we encountered giant box jellyfish, huge pelicans, very large lizards, and we never saw a koala in the wild. And the further north we traveled, the greater risk of alligators along with the ever-present sharks. More than once, I wanted to try and just go wipe the bottom of the boat. And I looked down. One time there were like 9 remoras under the boat. And I don't want to play with them because they try and hook onto you. And the other time there were all these little gray sharks. I wasn't going to play. So we went to a nice resort and came in, and the kids were playing in the sand, and pretty sweet. And you notice our dinghy has wheels on the bottom of it, so that you can pop the wheels down and roll it up the beach. And when the tide goes out, in some of these places the tide was 12 feet, you could roll it down the beach to get back in. So then we found out we had a stowaway on board. He was a small gecko who lived somewhere in the cockpit. So I named him Gordon. Everybody get it? Gordon gecko. Okay. So it was prime whale migration season. We happened to be in the right place at the right time. So these were about 75 feet off the boat. That was nice. And then we anchored off a beach, and you can see the beach in the background. And the whales were in the shallows inside of us on the beach side, 4 adults and a baby, and they were teaching the baby how to breathe. And it was absolutely magical because you see the mom, and then you see the baby come up. And then there are 2 other mothers surrounding them and guarding them that are always in between you and the baby. So here you see the baby come up and do this little spout, tiny little spout, and go back in. There's this little spout and go back down. And it was just, they were 50 feet from the boat. I mean, it was crazy. So then we went to Bundaberg and had to go to the rum distillery. That was fun. They make great rum, and they only make it for Australia. They don't export it. You can get Bundaberg ginger beer at the stores, and that's the only thing we have here. And we were very naughty in their factory store where they sold their specialty rum. So we met another cruiser sundowners with cruisers from New Zealand, Australia, and Germany. And the Australian Museum of Marinas were absolutely first class. Many of them shared harbors with commercial shipping, so there was a long conveyor belt in the background. We were often dodging ships as we came in and out, and it had the most wonderful sunsets. We had folding bikes, and we got to expand what we could see. So here we were. So we were a couple of miles away from the marina, and I'll zoom in here, and you can see this, the big coastline right on the ocean. This is the ocean. And there's the marina in the distance. And then here's an aerial view of that same marina, so you get a feel of what it is. And then I was chased by giant Australian crabs. And we found a cruiser's outpost on Piercy Island where cruisers leave personal remembrances of what it is. So this place was pretty eclectic, and everyone would have something carved, or they would bring something special that they made at home and put there. This was a very favorite spot for cruisers going up and down the coast. So that was fun. And then all along the coast, we often had to dodge ships that were waiting to load up, just anchored offshore. And then we got to the exclusive Hamilton Island Resort. We had to duck to the far side of it to come in. So we came in, but we couldn't just come in and turn. We had to go way down over here and turn and come up this side because here's the runway. They didn't want our mast in the way of the runway. So we had to go down. They had a line. You had to go down to the line to cross to come back up and in. So it was a super yacht level marina. We rented a golf cart for the day, and they had a dozen restaurants, a gold cart racetrack. beaches with snorkeling and diving, hotel accommodations on both sides, and then private beach bungalows along one side. There was a golf course on the other island you had to take a launch to get to. We did splurge. We went to a mountain-sized restaurant with beautiful views, and at night they turned on the pool lights, and it was spectacular. This is as good as it gets, and they got a 5-star review from us. So then further on one of the islands in the Whitsundays, we came upon a national park. They bring you up to these caves, and it turns out that there are indigenous, ancient things that were thousands of years old. And then you come back to the boat, and we got a visitor. There was a very well-known and smart cockatoo. So I crumbled up crackers on a plate and held the plate out for him, and he basically ate out of my hand. Very funny. So we don't have a lot of, we're right in the Great Barrier Reef. We're right along the islands of the Great Barrier Reef, and we did a lot of snorkeling. But our underwater photography skills are not that wonderful, and I don't have anything much more than like the GoPros. So, you have to forgive me on that. But we did find these 3-foot giant clams. So we were swimming over these clams, and you could see them blowing the water in and out. Amazing stuff. So then we stopped at a Coral Sea Marina. And if you've ever seen the TV show Below Decks, where it's about the crew on a mega yacht, and all the stuff that goes on, this is where they're based, out of this marina. So it was pretty swanky. And they had this unique floating cruise lounge with heads and showers on the first floor, and then meeting rooms and a bar on the top. And the docks were incredible at night. You just can't say amazing or exotic enough. This is where all the Sydney and Brisbane millionaires hang out. And the boat crews all ran their bicycles up and down the docks to get to and from. So here we were out sailing again. We have finally had some wind. We carry 130 gallons of diesel in our tanks and had 35 more gallons of diesel on the deck, plus an extra 5 gallons of gas for the dinghy. And we use those extra jugs more than once. I keep them covered up in matching t-shirts to keep them from disintegrating in the sun. At one point, I had striped shirts on all of them, and they look like a little rugby team on the foredeck. So we went to Magnetic Island and hiked to the various lookouts and vistas. We worked our way up the coast. And then at one point, we got to a little outdoor restaurant that had a kookaburra that would visit every afternoon for handouts. So that was pretty fun. And we were told crocodiles everywhere, don't go in the water, sharks everywhere. And finally, we got to the very, very northernmost point of Australian continent, which is pretty funny because they were shooting at this with shotgun slugs. So here we were at the top of Australia, and there's only one little place. There are a couple of little islands right above Australia, and that's ultimately where I was to check out from Australia. So this is Thursday Island, the last outpost. So, and you can see here, I had to go get diesel. There's no gas, fuel docks in most of Australia, except for inside the bigger marinas. Everywhere else, you've got to get jerry jugs and either get a ride or be ingenious and put your jerry jug on your little cart and strap it to your bicycle and ride 2 blocks into the gas station 7 times. So, and my Australian, time was almost up. Not only was my visa running out, but my Australian courtesy flag was on its very last legs. And that's where we end in Australia. So thank you very much. So I encourage you to try some kava in the back. Do not be afraid if you're going to be able to drive home. I just want you to taste it. It has a really nice flavor to it. It's kind of like the Yonkers phone book soaked in water for a week. Okay. So do try just to sip and see. And if you're so interested, you could take your camera and take a picture of this QR code, and it will give you the link to my YouTube channel that has all my other seminars on it. And this seminar will be on that shortly once I get it posted.